What we're going to talk about today is a concept called just transition. It's a term that was coined by a labor union leader named Tony Mazzocchi from Brooklyn, New York. He was the president. He became the president of the Atomic Oil and I don't know the union that was the union for workers in oil refineries and nuclear power plants, and he was unlikely environmental leader too as well. And because he came from that background, he felt that if we're going to transition away from energies that are harming communities, we need to make sure that the communities that host things like oil refineries, nuclear power plants, coal plants, and in our case, shale gas, should have should be the first priority for policymakers and social nets, so that if the workers are out of work because of our environmental policies, they are able to get retraining and other jobs in other industries, so that no worker is left behind and no community is left behind because they lose their source of income. And so one of the word just transition is actually a great word to, if you're working with union leaders or labor leaders, to use to describe what kind of work that we're seeking to do. Because I personally want to make sure, and just my background as a union organizer, I'm a delegate for the Industrial Workers of the World in Northeast Pennsylvania. We have a branch based out of Scranton, and we cover the 570 area code with the Workers Helpline. I periodically help gas workers with unemployment claims and things like that. And the gas industry right now has no plan for the workers who are laid off. Right now, the rig count in Pennsylvania is at 2009 levels. It's less than half of the drilling rigs that were present in the state in 2011 and 2012, and that meant a lot of layoffs for gas workers. And as we saw yesterday, central water impoundments are being used to store fresh water that's piped from streams. It's eliminating, in one case we had a water withdrawal in Jersey Shore, Pennsylvania, eliminated 600 truck trips a day. And it meant that one company, Stallion Oilfield Services, had laid off 32 drivers in 1 week. Once that thing came online, it was a very quick layoff. And so an advantage we have as organizers is our connections with other people in the progressive movement in labor, and it's a connection that has not been well maintained. If you go to pipeline hearings, you see the labor unions testify for the pipelines and things like that. So we need to come up with a program for Northeast Pennsylvania, and we'll hear examples that talk about fostering traditional rural heritage industries, like tourism, recreation, real estate, agriculture, things that we've always had in Northeast Pennsylvania, but also new industries that we can have here that are reduced waste streams. And Deirdre is going to talk about sustainable agriculture and how that can be fostered in the region. And I think that if we can present to our peers in the rural shale fields, regardless of their political background, hope and economic programs and things that will lift us up and become resilient communities, it'll be a great way to combat fracking with a positive solution in mind. And so this is a beginning of a conversation. I'd like to convene more often in the shale fields about what we can do and what we advocate for in alternatives. So the question we're going to pose to the panel, to the speakers, is regarding your topic you're speaking about, how can that be fostered in Pennsylvania, and how do we get away from shale gas to get into some of these other ways of producing good stuff?
Thank you for all being here. A couple of things talking about heritage. When we think about our heritage, we think about where we came from in this country. And in Pennsylvania, we have a long heritage of resistance and fighting. We're probably, Pennsylvanians, I say, are the most resilient people in the country. We've been beat up by every industry, the oil, gas, steel, coal, and we keep coming back. But it goes back not just to, you can argue about the Native Americans that, were resistant here too, but if you think about going back to the American Revolution, we were a fragile country fighting a big government England. And they said, oh, we'll never be able to do it. And we did it. We figured out a way to gain our independence. And that's why I think we have hope. We can do this. We don't have a choice. We have to succeed in what we're doing. So with that, I'm going to just talk about some of the things that I'm from New Jersey. I live in Pennsylvania now, but I've been in this area for a long time. I've done business right around here, going back into the 80s, in the early 80s. I worked with a company that worked with the sawmills and the stone quarries around here, and I met a lot of the people before the gas companies came in here, and they were happy people. They were simple people, and some of the things that they learned was that, you know, they can't destroy, like, for example, a stone quarry. And we passed a few bluestone quarries yesterday on our tour that you might not even know they were there. And you could say, well, they were quarrying, stealing our stone. They also, you know, took some of the old wall stone and sold it as landscape stone, but they protected things. They didn't abuse the water. They didn't abuse the land. They knew that there was a limited thing that they had. Same thing with the forestry. Pennsylvania is really the home of the forestry industry in the United States and in all of North America, really. One of our governors, Gifford Pinchot, he believed in renewable resource of forestry. And he was in conflict with another environmentalist, John Muir, who was a preservationist. And I think there's room for both. If you studied forestry, you know, what was done early in the development of this country, where they just thought there was, you know, an endless amount of trees. They came in and clear-cut things. And we're slowly starting to realize that how bad that was. But we're managing things now. We're learning that we can forest, we can harvest trees, but we do it properly. And where I live over in Pike County, which is where Gifford Pinchot started the Yale School of Forestry, right in the middle of Milford. They have an experimental forest station where they're trying to reintroduce the American chestnut and doing a lot of really science forestry things with some of the universities. And that's something that is kind of getting lost here in this with the gas industry. They're coming in and they're clear cutting for pads, ponds, pipelines, and they'll never restore those areas. You know, the soils in these areas, there's reasons why you see stone walls here and boulder outcroppings, is because there is no soil. That is our soil, rock. And once you've destroyed the composition of the soil, there's no forestry that you can do anymore, and it becomes an invasive thing. Same thing with the stone quarries that really produced in some of the larger cities you see in Scranton, Wilkes-Barre, and in Milford too. You see these huge, beautiful stone buildings that came from right around here. And I worked with quarrymen that sold us stone, and they talked about their grandfathers and how they quarried stone and hauled it out with mules, and it was quite challenging. But that's all going away because the land to be leased for fracking and pipelines doesn't make it worthwhile them for even do any of that. So these people are now transitioning and doing other things, whether it's with the industry or moving out of the area. And a lot of people I've talked to that have either leased their land or, you know, had problems with what's going on with don't want their children here. They move out of the area. And it's a shame when you have the people whose hearts are here move out and we lose their resource. Because really, when we think about, you know, our water, our air, but our real most important resource here in Pennsylvania is our people. And I think we can tap into that. And that's why it's nice to see people from all different areas and different ages doing some of this. I've been kind of an activist for a long time. I've done some fights and things like that. And it's discouraging sometimes when you lose. But we are starting to win. Another thing that I know Deirdre's going to talk about is the agriculture. Back during when the Second World War came about, people started growing what they called victory gardens. And everybody had a garden. And I remember when I was a kid putting up fruits and vegetables in mason ball jars. And, I don't remember us ever buying a can of tomatoes. I don't remember ever buying, canned fruit. We always had our own. And I'm Italian, so my father's philosophy was, if I can't eat it, I don't need it. So everything in the backyard was edible. And if the grass took too long to cut, it became part of the vegetable garden. And what's happened now is because of our lifestyle where we all have to work, and there's two people in the household working with, you can't have a garden anymore. And even though we're starting to realize that we need to eat more vegetables, and I know there's a lot of vegetarians and vegans here, and I support that, it just bothers me when I go to, whether it's a supermarket, you see all these fruits and vegetables, and where are they coming from? And I grow a lot of my own fruits and vegetables because I can. That's something I'm knowledgeable about doing, and it really is something I think that we need to encourage people more to do. And there's a lot of simple ways of growing some of your own vegetables, and also supporting a lot of the farmers markets and the local things. I work up in Sullivan County, New York, and we have a very big industry group there's a lot of dairy and cattle farms up there that really have almost gone out of business, and they were looking for fracking as a way to keep their farms, and a lot of them are very upset. So we're working with them and giving them some other ideas. There's a yogurt plant that's starting up there that will supply a lot of Greek yogurt to New York City. And just a matter of coming up with novel ideas on how to market. I mean, I always joke with them. I said, do you really think that Ben & Jerry's makes better milk up in New England? Why can't it come from Sullivan County? We have one farmer who's, where I work, there's a lot of Hasidics, and they come up in the summertime and they all look for the kosher meals. So this one farmer has come up with, he raises chickens, ducks, sheep, and dairy cows, and he produces that all kosher. So instead of getting 30 cents a gallon for his milk, he's doing it kosher, and he's getting more money, and at the same time, now he's marketing it as a health food type of thing. And we don't think about that. People, if you're familiar with the kosher market, there is a certain procedure that you have to do to produce it. Well, what do we look at when we're looking at organic foods and special things? A lot of the same things, so it's really a transition. It's a guy who took a little novel idea and he's marketing it, and he's able to keep his farm. And these are the things that we can't just look to just the farmers. We're not looking to just the farmers. We have, I work for a performing arts center, Bethel Woods Center for the Arts, but one of our sister not-for-profits is called Sullivan Renaissance. And we're doing some major things with all the different organizations, whether it's the hospitals, the colleges, even now we have a casino coming to us. So we're getting all these people involved to come up with a better way that's making the county come back. Sullivan County is one of the most depressed areas in the state of New York, and one of the depressed counties, and it used to be one of the most booming. I work where they, the original Woodstock was, and people say, oh yeah, but that's not what it was famous for. It used to be the Catskills were the entertainment capital of the world with, Frank Sinatra and everybody. And then now it's kind of dying. So we can't just look at just us as activists to help improve our areas. We need to get the people, the nurses, the doctors, the businessmen to come up with these novel ideas and sit down at the table, and that's what we're doing. And sometimes it makes some really strange people sitting across from each other who are staunch Republicans and progressives, and they sit down and they can talk. Maybe sometimes it gets a little loud, but we come up with ideas, and that's really what is going to solve our problems and help us move forward, whether it's here in Pennsylvania or anywhere else where we come from. So that's all I have to say.
I just trained in direct action, but I also I run a certified naturally grown farm about an hour from here. It's called Endless Mountains Farm. We named it after the bioregion here because part of what we want to do at this farm is be a part of restoring the traditional way of doing things around here, which I see as healthier for the community and the environment. I think that today kind of demonstrates my theory on change making, because I began the day by talking about how to fight things, and I'm ending the day by talking about how to build things. I think that you can't just tell people that there's a problem and not have either through you or somebody else offer some sort of solution. So not everybody has to have the solution, but this is a really unique opportunity in time where things are pretty bad for a lot of people. A lot of people are really unhealthy and really struggling financially and live in really unhealthy environments. So the idea kind of started for me. I went to college at the University of Massachusetts, and I got a degree in community organizing. And a lot of my fellow classmates were actually union workers who were like 3 times my age, and they were sent there by their unions through the Boston utility companies to come in and learn union organizing. And I was usually the only environmentalist in the room, and so the teacher would initiate debates where these workers would say, well, what you're calling for is going to make me lose my jobs. And I would have to say, well, your job is making people lose their sense of life, right? So we got to this kind of hopeless point where we all said, I guess we're all screwed. There's absolutely nothing we can do about it. And then it kind of evolved into, it doesn't seem like there can be separate movements anymore. There can't be an environmental movement. There can't be a labor movement. It's just got to be a movement to rebuild community. And so for me, that means to, restore my family's 250-year-old farm where a pipeline was proposed to be built 5 years ago. It's called the Atlantic Sunrise Pipeline now, and they rerouted it through other people's farms. And the reason they rerouted it away from my farm was because my neighbor has a conservation easement on her farm. So that's where I started to figure out these are directly related in a way that I don't even want to have to deal with, but now I have to, and I'm not the only one like that. So PASA is Pennsylvania Association for Sustainable Agriculture, and I noticed quite a shift in the conference that they had in the past 2 years. So once a year, all the sustainable farmers in Pennsylvania will come together in State College and talk about farming, new ways of farming, and talk about things that are making farming difficult. It's usually things that are financial. So most of the workshops are, how do we make a tractor out of salvaged trash and make it work? So that's one thing that's saying, hey, there's like a financial problem here. These people are trying to make things better and healthier, but we're having to teach each other how to build rototillers out of old bike parts that we found on the side of the street. The other thing I noticed was last year, to talk about fracking, it was almost as though nobody wanted to touch the issue there. They had 1 or 2 workshops on it, and it was just like, I don't know, like, oh, you're going to say that word? And this year, I feel like half the conference was about fracking. There were a lot of workshops on it, and it was on almost everybody's mind. Almost every farmer I talked to there brought up fracking, and most of it was because they either live where the gas well exists already, or a pipeline was proposed to go through their farm, and they're going to lose their organic certification, and they're potentially going to lose their entire business. And so, to relate a story that's close to me about how much of a threat this is, I have, back home in Columbia County, we're friends with a young couple who they have a 4-year-old, a 3-year-old, and they just had a baby 2 weeks ago. And about 5 months ago, the Atlantic Sunrise Pipeline was proposed to go right through both of their farm fields, right next to their house. And they are farmers who focus on the topsoil, the quality of the topsoil on their farm. So for the past 5 years, they've been raising children and focusing on building topsoil health. And all of a sudden they found out, not only are we gonna come rip up your topsoil, dam your swimming and fishing hole, but we're also gonna put a deadly piece of infrastructure about 30 to 40 feet from your house where you have toddlers running around. And so they have a CSA. So if they're going to be facing 2 or so years of construction where all their topsoil is ripped off, and now all of a sudden there's a pipeline under there, and it's with Williams Company. Williams has a terrible safety record. The pipelines leak a lot. Does it seem like the people who want to buy a CSA, the people who what they value in their food is that it was grown securely, are they going to come back and buy a CSA from this farm? Or are they going to find a different farm that doesn't have a pipeline coming through, and they don't have to lose their CSA for 2 years while the line is going in? So there's a lot of people that they thought that they were achieving their dream, and they were getting this once-in-a-lifetime chance to do what they thought was best and what they thought was right, and get away from this corporate structure we have that makes everything infertile, and all of a sudden it's been taken away from them. And I mean, as if it wasn't hard enough, I'm sure a lot of people understand that the government agriculture subsidies, the amount that is given to sustainable farmers compared to large farmers that are growing like Monsanto seeds, you might as well say sustainable farmers are getting nothing. And if you look into large farmers or farmers who have these huge miles and miles of soybeans that they got from Monsanto, they have their own kitchen garden behind their house because they won't feed their family that stuff because it's not actually food. And that the thing about Pennsylvania is the way the land is here, it's one of the most perfect places in the country to have these kind of small farms because we've got these small valleys that for, the history of the planet have been getting filled and fed by the water that comes through the forests and down the mountains. So we have some of the most fertile grounds. And that's what people are trying to reconnect to is it used to be that our families ran the farms and 3 generations of the family lived in the house together. That's how my house is. And everybody stayed home, and Greg was kind of talking about it, like how can you have a garden now when 2 people are in the house and they need to work? It used to be the entire family could be there working together. And that's why farm families used to have a lot of kids, and that's why they got the summers off, because people were farming. And so that kind of makes me think about there's a lot of fertility issues going on in Pennsylvania right now. So there was a study, U.S. News reported on a study recently saying anyone living within a certain amount of distance from a fracking well is likely to have miscarriages, reproductive issues, or infertility. So you're looking at people who are trying to make the ground and themselves healthier and fertile, and at the same time being faced by this thing that's trying to do the opposite, which is really unfortunate because the way things work is we give food to our neighbors. I don't grow berries, but my neighbor does, and she doesn't grow squash, but I do, so we trade. Our friends up the road raise chickens for meat, and we don't. So if we do something for them, we'll get some meat. So this is like one way that we can get away from the financial system that's really burdening everyone and keeping us away from doing healthier things. And that can happen on a much larger scale that's kept to a community size. Because, I didn't really prepare this, but it's just, I feel like it's an obvious connection for me and for a lot of other people that we need food to survive. And if there's people that grow food, they should be providing food for people that need it. And the way we are right now is we're relying on these large food systems. So you're going to the grocery store, you're buying this food, and it's making you sick because it doesn't have any nutritional value. Then you have to go to the hospital, and all of a sudden you're on like 5 different prescriptions a day just to make it through. And so that's where we're at right now. So I have a really hard time seeing society as healthy. But at the same time, I'm involved in this really beautiful sustainable farmers community in Pennsylvania that sees a healthier way. And if we could get the finances and the resources to do it, it would be great, because a lot of us work full-time on top of farming. Actually, I don't know a single organic farmer in my county who doesn't have to have another job. So that really prevents us from being able to build up as much as we would like to. I guess the moral of the story here is that the resources and the money is out there. We know how to do this. We know what we're doing, but there's a lot standing in the way, and that's what it is. There's a lot standing in the way, and it needs to be removed. So that's it.
Okay, so hi everyone. For those who came in since yesterday, I'm Mike Ewall. I'm the founder and director of Energy Justice Network, and while it doesn't feel that way, I'm technically Alex's boss, but we're kind of just all hierarchically kind of more equal than that sounds in operation. So basically, this is going to be my good news presentation. Usually I'm like dooming, glooming everyone, right? And so this is going to be like the best positive presentation you've ever seen me give. So we're going to talk about just transition. Just transition basically is a concept that came out when I think it was, I'm going to blank on the guy's name. Tony Mazzocchi, what union was it at the time? You remember?
It was oil refineries in...
It's OCAL, yeah. Oil Refinery and Atomic Workers Union, right? Back in, I think, the early 90s, came up with a just transition platform that was, I think it was called a Super Fund for Workers, and I couldn't find it. We wanted to get it online. It's not, you can't even find it in Google. But it was a platform basically talking about how like environmentalists and labor can work together and help workers get retrained and get into new jobs that are going to be good for the environment and actually like not just leave them out of work, so we don't have as many labor environmental clashes. So these are some of the principles of just transition. This is not like a formal document, but some are being invented or reinvented as we speak. And these are just some of the basic ideas. So we want to make sure that we're transitioning into things that are healthy and sustainable jobs, where communities actually are making the decisions on what happens to them. The standard formula is that a company decides, we want to do this here, and they go to the government and the government says, sure, here's a rubber stamp permit to do what damage you want to do. Just stay within certain limits and we won't look very hard. And that's the current model, but the principles of environmental justice, which people of color came together in 1991 to develop the 17 principles of environmental justice. And principle number 7 gets to this democracy point. And that point talks about the need for communities to make their own decisions and be part of the decision-making process. Actually, they should be the decision-making process. And it talks about a needs assessment, where instead of just taking a company's idea and saying, oh, okay, I guess this is needed, we'll take whatever jobs you throw at us, the community decides, well, do we need energy? Do we need something to do with our waste? Do we need something for jobs? And if the answer is yes, then you don't just go for what answer is being pushed at you. You do the next step, which is an alternatives assessment. Say, well, what are our options? And then you pick the best option, and then you get to somewhere. And that's actually democratic decision-making process. Very different from what we're used to. Of course, we want things to be local, decentralized as much as possible. We would rather see them be in the public sector, or at least cooperatively owned, worker-owned. Want to make sure that people have living wages, although honestly, this is something that I have had some interesting and struggled conversations with, because it's like we want everyone to reduce their consumption a lot. So how much should they be making in our ideal society given that we have this whole global thing where like everyone else in the world, some of them like need to consume more and a lot of us need to consume way less. And so the standard like goal for union wages, if we're going to be realistic in a global sense and a justice sense, might be a little bit lower than what a lot of the unions we talk to are interested in. Considering that the global average wage right now is I think about $8,000 a year, just to put things in perspective. So we need to make sure that there are retraining opportunities for workers and that the benefits of these programs are prioritized to the communities that are most impacted by the dirty energy industries, other industries that we're trying to transition away from, and to communities of color and low-income communities that are basically historically disadvantaged and need those benefits the most. So I'm going to go through some of the things that Neil was already talking about and then transition into energy solutions, which we'll talk about more. So this actually, Neil's daughter, I believe, took this picture of workers in a deconstruction crew in Baltimore. We actually just had a zero waste jobs forum that Neil and I organized in Baltimore a few days ago. And this is one of the companies that spoke there. They're basically dismantling buildings instead of demolishing them and then recovering all those materials, recycling and selling and reusing a lot of them and creating a lot of jobs in the process. And they're also basically all their workers are returning citizens from prison that are basically trying to get their lives back, and a lot of them have a hard time because a lot of places still have those check boxes of have you been convicted of something, and they can't get jobs, and so this is an entry back into a work life for them. So zero waste is basically, this is the official definition by the Zero Waste International Alliance, basically means that we're not going to burn or bury waste, that we're going to get as close to zero as we can. And it's kind of like zero workplace injury standards, or zero drug tolerance in schools. We don't expect to literally get to zero, so don't get caught up on that word. But the goal should be zero, because no business says, oh, we're going to set out to injure 5 workers a year. That's our goal. Who would do that, right? That's crazy. So our goal for waste should be we're going to try to get as close to zero. And that's why, as Neil was saying, we want to at least get over 90% with that. So this is a chart from Neil's organization when they studied this first in 1997, and it shows that for every 10,000 tons of waste processed, you get 1 job if you're burning it, or 1 job if you're burying it. Of course, if you burn it, you still have to bury the ash, but that's a whole other matter. And you get about 10 jobs if you recycle the stuff, and many more if you're reusing. And so this is the same thing, but just broken out to more detail. You can see the reuse, like computer reuse, for the same amount of materials, you get almost 300 jobs. So this is a job creation engine that we're just missing because we're burying and burning all this trash. Now, this is another study that came out much more recently in 2012. This is 2010 data showing that there's over $11 billion worth of material that we're dumping in holes or burying or burning and then dumping ash in holes. So these are all the materials that are being thrown away every year that could be creating jobs throughout our country. Now, Austin is one of the places where they generate a really good zero waste plan. It was over 300 pages. You can find it on our zero waste page on our website. This is just the cover page of their summary. And this is showing how they plan to get over 90% by 2040 diversion from landfills. And they have no incinerators left in Texas, so it's just very cheap dumping. Right now, like our landfills around here are like $40, $50, $60+ a ton. In Texas, it's like $20 a ton. It's real cheap. They have plenty of land. And they still found it made economic sense to put together an ambitious plan to move away from that. This is what Neil was talking about in Alachua County, Florida, the resource recovery park they have to co-locate all these different industries so that they can be more efficient in terms of getting that stuff done. And this is not a gathering of hippies, but an Ohio State University football game, and they got not only really cool recycling symbols made on their field, but 98% diversion in one of their events, which is pretty damn close to zero waste. So of course that's a contained event where like what kind of materials people are generating, but still that's pretty great. If football fans can do it, anyone can, right? So sorry for all the football fans out there. Gotta watch what I say.
Penn State fans.
Oh God, I went to Penn State, but gagged me. So the zero waste hierarchy, basically in a nutshell, and there's a much more expanded version of this that you'll find on our zero waste page, and you can go here and find that Austin plan and other materials, including a lot of stuff from Neil's organization. But this is basically the nutshell version of it. You have your 3 R's, to reduce, reuse, and recycle, and add another R or 2 to be a little more forward thinking. And you want to have people separating their compost from their recyclables, from their waste. And then you want to make sure that what you throw away, what you put in that black bin, you have like usually blue bin, green bin, black bin, and ideally you would have a few different categories that you're recycling into, so it's not all single streaming mixing together, because that lowers the value of your paper. But you want to take that rest of the stuff and look at it, not just dump it in a hole or a machine, but actually say, what's left? How do we get closer to zero? I should have brought this with me, but I have a show and tell. It's in my car. JC will get it. I kept all the waste I made in January because I saw this article that said that this one woman, young woman, made a mason jar's worth of waste in 2 years. And I was blown away by that. I'm like, all right, how close can I get to that? Because I know I can get pretty close because I'm already pretty close. And I basically had like maybe this much waste. And it was basically just plastic film I made all month. And it's easy to carry around because it's like nothing. It's like a third of a little shopping bag. So you want to figure out like how do we get closer to zero? What's in that remaining part so we can feed it into things to like ban products. Like we got DC to ban styrofoam recently, and there are a number of things that either need to be redesigned, banned, or remade so that we can like capture those materials properly. And then you want to use machines to get the rest of the stuff out because not everyone's got to perfectly sort out the stuff. And then you basically want to stabilize what's left. You want to digest it so that when you put it in a landfill, you don't have a gassy, stinky landfill, which is a real problem for communities in terms of health exposures and in terms of global warming. So we're going to jump into energy stuff now. So in energy, you have a similar hierarchy. You have reduce, reuse, recycle with materials. You have conservation and efficiency are like reduce and reuse. And then your recycling and composting are just different set of technologies, mostly solar, wind, and energy storage. And this here is a place where you can find more of the stuff I'll show you in a second. So I just put half these slides together in the past hour. But this is one of the studies that when we're making the argument around natural gas, transition away from it, this is one of the best arguments because really natural gas produces the fewest jobs of any way you can deal with energy. So this is if you measure it per like job years per gigawatt hour produced. You look at all these things like natural gas is like way down here at the bottom. Of course, biomass and landfill gas are terribly dangerous and toxic. So even though they get a lot of jobs, you don't want them. They're very bad. But a lot of the stuff is clean, good stuff, well, except for nuclear and coal. So you don't want those. but the fact that nuclear is at the bottom, I mean, all the wind and solar is like way more jobs than natural gas. Oh, this is my waste in January, so y'all can do this. It's possible. It's not hard. Thank you. So if you measure this, what did I miss?
I don't know what's in there.
Oh.
Mostly plastic film.
It's all plastic film, basically. I washed it. It's okay. No, that gets composted. No, handkerchiefs.
Right.
Yeah. So the jobs per amount of money invested is another way of looking at it, or per amount of money output. And by both of those measures as well, natural gas is at the bottom, tied with oil. So it's a loser in all the ways you can look at it. And these are two different studies, and the sources are at the bottom. Okay, so I won't go into this too much, but I showed a little bit of this yesterday. This is just some of the charts we put together recently on where energy comes from, so it's understandable. There are three sectors that energy consumption happens in, and a lot of people get confused, and you have politicians talk about, oh, well, we need to like drill in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge for oil because of our electricity prices in California. It's like, wait, we don't use oil for electricity. That's in transportation, hardly anything in electricity. So just understanding that these are separate sectors, the solutions look a little bit different for each one. And this is the same thing except we total them up at the top. And the heating I broke into three subcategories like the government does because, and this is all Energy Information Administration data, industrial heating is actually most of the heating sector. So these are paper mills and cement kilns and stuff like Alex was talking about yesterday. So they're very energy intensive. It's not usually like your own home heating that we're talking about. And this is just the overall energy use trends. I point this out because we hit this point where our economy wasn't doing so well, and it went down a lot, and I was so excited because everyone's always like, oh, we're always going to be using more and more energy, and just explain like the justification for tons and tons more natural gas power plants. And really, the fact is we can level this off, which is happening, and we can actually reduce, except now that they have the economy going again, our consumption is going back up. So that's not good for us. And electricity-wise, this is just, if you look at just electricity and not the heating and transportation sectors, similar trends, but just so you can see it. Now, one of the most exciting studies I've seen is this one for a few years ago, December 2012, by University of Delaware, and it says that the grid that we're sitting in, the PJM grid, which is like Pennsylvania, Jersey, Maryland, DC, Delaware, and bits of the other states they've been gobbling up, that our electricity grid can be met entirely, like 99.9% by wind, solar, and energy storage by 2030 with no government subsidies, cost effectively, and with 99.9% reliability. And that just blew me away. Like, I've been saying stuff like this for a long time, like, oh yeah, we could do it with just the clean stuff, we don't need to burn any of that stuff, and like even the biomass stuff and the trash, and you get seen as if you're crazy, and now like studies are starting to say this stuff, and it's good. So if you need a study, it's up on our website, on our solutions page. And this is something I put together when we were fighting the natural gas power plants 15 years ago. And at that time, like, no one knew about fracking. It was just like, what are you doing fighting this? This is the solution. And if you're against natural gas plants, you must be for coal and nuclear, right? And I was like, no. We need to find a way out of this. And that's why I really started to educate myself around what the solutions are and how we can reduce demand. And some of you may remember Bush and Cheney had this energy task force, this secretive thing with Halliburton and these other cronies that they met with, and they came up with this awful plan. And basically that plan was not just Bush's cronies coming up with this. This is a trend that started under Clinton, so it's not like Democrats are immune to this. And the energy plan that they actually passed in Congress is one that was written by the Democrats. The Republicans get the blame for it, but the Senate Democrats actually are the ones that made that version of the bill that was really awful, and Obama as a senator voted for it. So it was a bipartisan effort to screw us all and enable fracking. It's what put the Halliburton loophole into effect, put the BP spill, made that possible. All those things happened out of that. And in the course of selling this to the public, Bush was on the radio. I heard him on NPR saying, a power plant a week is all we ask. And he meant for the next 21 years. And 90% of those were to be natural gas power plants. And that's what they tried to do. And that's what folks across the country, like, kicked about 60% of them out and kept them from getting built. So what they were talking about was, under the existing trends, they were going to see energy demand increase by about 45%. And so this triangle is going to be filled mostly with natural gas power plants. And I was like, well, like, why are the big greens, the big environmental groups, coming out with like statements saying, oh, we don't need 17 to 1900 new power plants, we just need 600. I'm just like, what? You're nuts? Like, we don't need any of these. And so I was trying to find stuff, and they had some 5 labs national study that justified how we only need 600 power plants. And I'm like, how can we actually need no new power plants and shut down a lot of the ones we have? And so I started digging up studies, and in the early 90s, I found the only studies I've even found in this time since. So if anyone finds newer ones, I would love to see them. But the Electric Power Research Institute, these are the folks that want to sell you energy. And they said that over 10 years time frame, we can reduce our electric demand 27 to 44% cost effectively with off the shelf stuff at the time. And I'm like, that's a conflict of interest for them to say that, and they're saying it, so that must be true, right? And then the Office of Technology Assessment, which was this great agency until Gingrich and his Republicans got rid of it, but it was one of the only cool government agencies that actually told you like what the social implications of science are. They said that we can reduce our demand 33% over 12 years. And so I made this chart just so you can just see it's like the same trend lines. Because when you hear this one, you're going to think, oh, they're crazy radicals. But Rocky Mountain Institute said 75% reduction is possible, but over 20 years. And then you put it on the same chart, you're like, well, that's the same trend line. They just went out further. So it's not a crazy idea to think that we can reduce our electric demand by a huge amount if we just do the right things and give ourselves the right time and incentives to do it. And then we don't have to be talking about building hundreds and hundreds of power plants. We can be talking about shutting most of them down. And this is from Rocky Mountain Institute, just justifying how they come up with that 75% figure. And I'm going to try to explain it all. It's a little complicated, but they're basically saying that you can get some savings, like you switch your lighting out first, and then you don't have to heat and air condition, well, I guess you don't have to air condition your place as much because you're not using wasteful types of light that heat the place back up. And so there's some savings that, like, these savings pay for these things to be done, so you get all the way to here without having to spend anything, pretty much. So it's pretty cool if you add all that stuff up. So we have a lot of wind potential in this country. We have a lot of solar potential in this country that we're not using much yet. And I'll come back to that in a sec. So the cost of all these different energy sources, the next few slides will show that even this is outdated, but this is the most recent stuff from the Energy Information Administration. And it shows that in 2012, the most expensive things were like trash and biomass burning, geothermal, nuclear. Offshore wind is still very expensive. So-called clean coal, which there is no such thing, but coal gasification. So these are on the expensive end of types of energy to make. Natural gas, though, has been undercutting like a whole mess of things, right? And wind and solar that we want to see, like the onshore wind that's more affordable, is still like kind of in the middle on some of this. But that's completely changed just in the past few years. This is one of the articles I saw on Bloomberg, so this is not like Greenpeace or something. Bloomberg is like this Wall Street firm, and they're saying that like, whoa, solar is like changing the whole game right now. It's really crazy. And it says solar electricity is on track to be cheaper than average electricity prices in 47 states next year, in 2016. And this is if tax credits that are supposed to expire next year are renewed. Now, this next slide is if they're not even renewed. So say the Republicans probably not going to renew these things. They're still going to reach what they call grid parity in 36 states in the country in 2016. That's like next year. And Pennsylvania's like right here. So these are all the states where like solar is going to be cheaper than the normal cost of electricity. So this is part of the same article, and this is their caption. This is Bloomberg saying, "Welcome to the Terror Dome." And I can only imagine who is terrorized the most by this. But these are the fossil fuels across the bottom here. I pointed, Henry Hub means natural gas, Brent means oil, so just put some explanations of this. But the rest of this is their chart directly. And this is solar just shooting in like a lightning bolt from the sky, intersecting the cost of some of the fossil fuels. And so this is how cheap solar is getting this fast. This is such a game changer. This is the Boston Globe saying one study found that the cost of utility-scale solar energy and wind power to be lower than that of natural gas. Like, I was expecting for a while for like the lines to be crossing, like in the next 5 years maybe, where like clean stuff gets cheaper than dirty stuff. I didn't expect in the past 6 months that like Wall Street firms and the Boston Globe are going to be saying, hey, we're here already. I'm like, wow. And so I think we're going to be at a point where if we hold the line and keep these dirty infrastructure projects from happening that they keep trying to build under this old model, basically we're like within 5 years away from the biggest battles being over where to put all the wind and where to put all the solar. This is another thing from a good advocate on the natural gas shale bubble kind of stuff. I'm blanking on her name. Deborah Rogers, thank you. With Energy Policy Forum, and she showed that onshore wind is already cheaper than natural gas plants to build, which is another huge game changer, because the natural gas plants have been cited as the excuse for why coal plants, nuclear plants, biomass, and trash incinerators in the past few years have been shutting down in some cases, because they can't compete with natural gas. And so if land-based wind is now undercutting that, that's tremendously good for us. So this is another article I saw that it was just so exciting. It's basically this like Silicon Valley entrepreneur guy who's got like all kinds of experience doing entrepreneurial things, and he's saying that within 15 years, like the age of coal, oil, and gas and nuclear will be over. That solar and wind will provide 100% of energy in competitive markets with no need for subsidies. That this is that guy Toby Sabas, this entrepreneur dude, and he's telling oil and gas executives that they're going to be out of business in less than 15 years. Like, wow, you know? And solar panels are now 150 times cheaper than they were in 1970. And another guy in an article, someone who's been consulting for like 20 years with like DuPont and Ford and all these big energy companies, is basically confirming that this is right, that we're looking at disruptive transformational system change. Okay, these are not like Earth First people talking, but it sounds like it is in some cases. He's also saying within 5 years, we're going to see on-site rooftop generation be cheaper than transmission costs. This is not what they call grid parity, it's called God parity. He's saying like this is going to be to the point where even if coal or nuclear and natural gas cost nothing to generate, which is impossible, just the cost of getting it to your house is going to be more than the solar on your roof. So it's basically saying the conventional industry is going to start going bankrupt. Yeah, you know. So yeah, they're talking about this disruption will be swift. Conventional energy sources will be obsolete or soon. We're looking at large-scale like revolution, essentially. That's going to be decentralized. Like all the large-scale top-down kind of stuff is just going to be replaced. And the funnest thing, because like I'm like, okay, usually we see this and we're thinking, no, they're talking about big-scale wind and big-scale solar, and we don't necessarily want those because there's some problems with that too. And I'll take it over any of this other stuff, but I'd rather have the decentralized kind. And to think that they're not even saying, oh, we can still consume and overconsume a lot. The people in this article quote are even saying, in the end, we're going to have to wake up to the impossibility of endless economic growth. Even with cheap zero-carbon energy, we can't have endless growth nor human progress defined by shopping. Like, I can't believe who's saying this stuff. Like, this isn't me saying it, and I'm glad they're saying it for me. That's awesome. So anyway, so most of this is on the electricity side. With transportation, it's not as easy to get transportation heating off of all burnable stuff. Like my goal is to like be against the invention of fire, basically. Like if it involves burning, we're against it. But with electricity, that's easy. And it's easy to say we don't need to burn even the bio stuff and the waste burning and the landfill gas burning. We don't have to burn anything or have nuclear or big dams to do electricity. That's the easy part. Transportation, though, you have the planes and boats problem. And with heating, you have industrial heating as a harder sector to solve. And those are ones that we have to try harder on. But the rest of it is still pretty easy to solve with non-burn solutions. So with transportation, like there's a whole bunch of stuff we could be doing with conservation and efficiency, getting people out of private vehicles with mass transit and all the things that we can do that are not in super rural areas. And then where we do have to have private vehicles, making sure that they're electric vehicles powered on wind and solar so that at least we can get off of having to burn stuff in the vehicles altogether. And with heating, we can do a lot with conservation and efficiency as well, and with different types of solar. And then, so we don't have to burn wood or anything else, we can get air source or ground source heat pumps using clean electricity and get off of burnable stuff for home heating as well, and in commercial heating too. Industrial heating is the only hard part because they need a lot higher temperatures, and you need like concentrated solar, and you might have to burn something maybe to make some of that work. But you know, if we stop using a lot of the things that industry makes, that'll help. So one of the most exciting things I saw is when I was up in Canada recently, a pretty cold place, Okotoks, Alberta, Canada, which is pictured here, so all this snow here and solar pieces throughout. They meet 90% of their winter heating needs with the solar from the previous summer. And I'm like, I don't think you can store heat that way, you know? But they're doing it underground. They have this like kind of like a geothermal type thing that's super insulated, and they store the summer's solar energy under their community and meet almost all their winter heating needs that way. And that's a pretty cool place. I was so amazed by this, so I had to plug it. So there's a website here where if you want to see like how they're doing it, it tells you all. It's called the Drake Landing Solar Community. And these are just some websites for more information, and I'll just leave it here so you can write some URLs down if you want to. Thanks.
Thank you, Mike. Given that we haven't really addressed labor as much as we just kind of mentioned that just transition comes from labor, I want to just quickly offer one policy that's been put in place since the 70s that can transition workers to these kinds of businesses. It's called the Trade Adjustment Act, and it created a benefit called the Trade Readjustment Allowance. When in the 70s and 80s, the mills and factories were moving overseas from the United States, the labor unions were threatening to almost go to war over the closure of these plants, and especially in the Rust Belt in Pittsburgh and Youngstown, Ohio. Workers were occupying U.S. Steel's offices in Youngstown, threatening to take over the plants like they did 100 years ago with the steelworker rebellions in Pittsburgh. The Congress at that time saw basically they had a choice. They could either let this happen or they can offer a bone to the labor unions. The bone was the Trade Adjustment Act, and it was one of the bones. And so the basic establishment of it was if your job is lost to international trade or because of a really cheap import, you are entitled to 4 years of college, 2 years of unemployment, and I think it's now 58 weeks of unemployment, and also free relocation assistance if you find a job anywhere in the country in your new trade. right? This is still in place. It's a federal government program that's run by the Labor Department and the Trade Adjustment Office. And I'll give you two examples. NRG is a big coal plant owner. In Cannonsburg, Pennsylvania, which happens to be also where all the Marcellus Shale companies have a commercial park for all their offices, in South Point, it's called, like Range Resources, Chesapeake, Cabot, they're all based there for collusion purposes. Cannonsburg had a coal plant that closed, and the IBEW, which is the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, petitioned the Trade Adjustment Office that their jobs were being lost because of cheap natural gas in the electric grid and the coming on of electric natural gas generation. And the Trade Adjustment Office is in charge of assessing that economic threat to their jobs. And they found that yes, because the Western Pennsylvania grid and other grids that are connected to Niagara Falls and things in Canada, that there was an international issue there, and that they would be eligible for these benefits. And all the workers at the plant, as it was closing, were given these 4 years of college, 2 years of unemployment, free relocation assistance. So you were able to get this benefit for these workers as the energy systems were changing so dramatically. And we know that whether or not we win, and fracking is rolled back very, very significantly or stopped, the industry crashes itself because they overproduce or they run out of gas, or there is some legislation or some kind of government policy that stops fracking somehow, that the shale gas industry is going to bust at some point. They may drill all the gas. All of those workers need to have a program like the Trade Adjustment Act, if we're going to talk about public policy and changing over to this electric grid, clean electric and electricity, to transition them to pay for this. And it's the economic benefit of moving to solar is greatly cheaper electricity. Any kind of revenue or savings that's in our energy systems needs to go to transitioning these workers first, and it needs to happen in communities like Southwest Pennsylvania, where the bituminous coal is used, for power plants and other things, so that the Rust Belt is one of the places, and the Scranton area where we lost a lot of manufacturing as well. We're transitioning that into clean energy jobs, so that workers don't have to be out of work. The other thing I want to just touch on, and Mike, one of the reasons solar and wind is becoming so cheap is because the rare metals that they use to make these things are produced in third world countries in massive rare metal mines that are very toxic themselves, with workers who are exposed to this and paid slave wages. And if those costs of those workers and those wages were living wages in their countries, the cost may not be, we may not transition as quickly, but we should not be relying on dangerous working conditions and toxic metal mines in South America and Asia to make these nice solar panels we like to look at in the United States. And green activists need to really be aware of that. And if we're going to push for these wind turbines and solar, I also don't like I think clarify for me, locals, didn't BP build this wind farm? Wasn't that the developer of this? There are major industrial operations in rural areas that are for urban areas predominantly, where the demand comes from for electricity. And we have to look at it. Our land is cleared and cut, and our ridges are cleared. Springs are plugged by some of the deep cement foundations of these things. And I think we need to look at getting industries that own these things centrally, like giant wind farms, taken away and decentralized. So I just want to add that to Mike's, because there are environmental justice implications for clean energy that we have to think about a lot if we're going to do it. And I always plug Mike, say, don't just talk about industrial development of this stuff. We also have to decentralize it.
Yes. So she was saying that she recycles all she can, but burns some of it, and that neighbors are not recycling at all, and what can we do about that? And also expressed concern that there's not enough solar around here in the winter. on the waste, one of the things that can be done, first of all, burn barrels are probably the worst thing you could do. It's better to even put it in a commercial trash incinerator, which I spent my life fighting, than to actually burn it in a burn barrel with no air pollution controls at all. That's one of the worst things possible, and that's why some rural communities have actually passed ordinances to ban burn barrels, and there are actually campaigns around that in some places. I know in New York, folks have been pushing for that. So that would be one thing that you could do is to try to end the use of burn barrels. Secondly, to get people to recycle, the best programs, and these are used in rural communities and urban communities around the country, there are about 9,000 or so, I think, and about 4 states that mandate this, and it's called Pay As You Throw. It's like a per bag program. Because right now you pay for how much electricity you use, how much water and gas you use, but you pay one fee for trash and you can be as wasteful as you want. And I know that this works in rural areas. It's been done in Iowa and all across Minnesota. And when they use these per bag programs, they generally don't find that there's an increase in illegal dumping, which people assume that there would be, because you're paying for it one way or another, through your taxes or through a fee. And so you're just transitioning to a fee where you can reduce it by producing less. And they find that in communities that use this per bag program, they end up with a 44% reduction in how much waste each person makes pretty much instantly. So it's a very successful program that a lot of communities are doing. I would encourage you to push for that no matter what kind of community you're in. As far as solar, I think there is enough solar generation even in areas like this. There are places far north of here that are managing to use solar, and it's not as efficient as if you're in Arizona, but you still can get a lot out of it. Well, you don't want to burn it no matter how hard or easy it is to burn, because burning plastics is pretty nasty stuff. You don't want to be breathing that. So you want to deal with that upstream. You want to make sure that if there's a way of not having plastic wrapped around bales in the first place, that's the ideal. Otherwise, at least put it in a landfill. It's going to do far less damage in a landfill than if you breathe it by burning it.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty common out in the country as people burn their trash, and maybe it needs to be an issue of also like understanding the implications of that more, because it's just such a common thing.
I just want to say there's in New York State, in Delaware County, there's a compost facility where they actually do take plastic with the domestic refuse and compost it. And it was modeled, that site was modeled after the site that they were talking about in Delaware. And they give away the compost material. And I'll be honest with you, I'm a horticulturist, and so I went and got some of this stuff, and I had it tested by Cornell Labs, and they said that don't even bring it on your site. It is one of the most toxic things you can put on your site, and they're advertising for people to take this and incorporate it in their vegetable gardens, and it makes a beautiful dark black soil with a pH that is like unbelievable.
I've been there and talked to the folks at the Delaware County Waste Management Facility, and they don't encourage you to use it. They don't encourage you to use it on vegetable gardens. That's for sure. I've been there in person, and they've said that. I was told they were actually selling it to landscapers, though, so I'm surprised they were advertising to give it away, and I don't know how long ago that was, but I've been told they actually get revenue from that because landscapers pay to take it. And I know that they get revenue for a lot of their other recyclables. They've done a very efficient job managing that landfill and keeping it open because they are not filling it because of all the composting and recycling that they're able to do.
No, it's a great theory of what they do there, and I commend them on it. As far as selling it to landscapers, there isn't enough of a demand. I know someone who hauls it out of there, and they give it to him just to get rid of it. And that's one of the things that we also see in composting, and I don't mean to spoil your thing, but in a lot of municipalities in New Jersey and in New York where they collect the leaves and they compost it and give it away for free, I personally have had, and I did landscaping a lot, had problems with that because of what also was in it. I'll give you an example. We did a large vegetable garden for a celebrity woman. and she wanted to use local leaf compost. And we built these beautiful gardens for her. And after the first rainfall, it looked like there was glitter in the gardens because there was glass. And the way the towns were collecting them, they were sucking up the leaves along the side of the road, and there was glass in them. And we ended up having to remove about 80 yards of soil from this vegetable garden. And, and she couldn't use it on her TV show, and I won't tell you who she is. But that's one of the things that we have to be careful when we are establishing these composting things is it seems real, theoretically it's a great way to get rid of trash, but you have to look at what the end product is and where it can be used before you start saying this is a great way to handle our refuse.
Thousands of Chinese workers commit suicide and riot at solar plant factories. Copper mines, one of the largest copper mines in this country is on sacred indigenous land. Rare earth minerals in Africa, we've mentioned slave labor. And that's just the tip of what exactly. So I want to know how that's just, first of all. How solar and wind, who need these rare earth minerals, how that can be just. I don't see it. And then it's a question of transition. So what are we transitioning to? When I hear about this solar, wind, etc., what I hear is it's just a continued industrialization in another form. I don't see transition to anything that I can support. So how are these things just, given what I'm talking about and given what actually these facts are? And what exactly are we transitioning to? Which I would argue we're transitioning to more of the same.
So if you look on our website under the wind stuff, we actually talk about that. We have a couple of articles we linked to about neodymium, about 2 tons of neodymium, which is a rare earth metal mined in China and with devastating consequences. About 2 tons of that are used in each wind turbine. And so that was pretty appalling alone, and that's just one example. And one of the things I was excited to see when reading up on that is that there are types of wind turbines that don't have to use that at all. And so nothing's perfect, and we need to recognize that there's no way of making our energy needs that we're using right now be met with like pixie dust. And I just came back a couple weeks ago from a meeting with climate justice activists all around the country who are working on developing an energy democracy platform. And some of these are like the native activists in Navajo Nation fighting the coal plants in the Four Corners area on their land. And all that energy is not even being used by their people who don't really have running water and basic things, but it's going to Los Angeles. And yet big mega solar projects that would damage indigenous territories in Southern California and are being fought on various grounds. The Navajo Nation is saying, bring them to us. We want them because right now we have this big coal plant and we would rather have that than the solar stuff that folks in California don't want. And so one of the organizers who I've known there for many years puts it in these terms that, we don't have the luxury of going for like the whole pixie dust approach and trying to have it be perfect. We need to deal with the fact that we have things that are far worse right now. And a transition means not waiting 30 years until we can make things out pixie dust, but getting as close as we can to better things now. And so I'm not negating these harms that exist. We need to be conscious of the fact that these materials are coming from very unjust situations, and we need to support everything that we can to move away from them and to decentralize as much as possible. But if we get caught up thinking that somehow something's perfect, and if it's not perfect, we can't support it, then we're just going to be spinning our wheels. And we also need to recognize that the dirty systems that we have right now and the alternatives that are to these wind and solar things, even conservation efficiency, requires building materials. What do we go do? Tear down every building in our country and magically like rebuild them out of materials that come from nowhere? I mean, efficiency is causing environmental justice problems. So you can't escape that, but at these things that stop polluting per kilowatt hour once you make them, because these gas plants or everything else, you build them and then they still keep creating pollution because they still have to mine or burn or bury or dig up and drill different resources. Wind and solar, at least that damage stops once you make it. And that's the first dividing line where we have to say if it's going to keep polluting per kilowatt hour, that's the dividing line we have to focus on first, and then we clean up the stuff on the cleaner side of that as we can.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up, Jordan. It's totally true. Yeah, just to like, it really sucks that we have to consume things. I would just kind of want to respond to that because I'm here to talk about agriculture. So factory farming for meat is one of the largest consumers of clean water and natural resources like fossil fuels. So people need to change their diets essentially, and need to change their diets based on what can be grown and raised and harvested where they live. And through the process of doing that style of agriculture, you're producing your own compost that you can share with other people, and the water is much cleaner, and you don't need as much energy. So, I mean, it gets much more in depth than that, but I just wanted to bring it to like a really basic level of saying like, the way we're living is totally insane and unnecessary. So. And it's really like the fault of America, along with other countries, that the rest of the world has to suffer to produce energy for us. And we have to take it in, it's our responsibility to figure that out, basically.
I have a few questions, but I'll keep it short. Thank you. It was a really great panel. One question for Deirdre was, I wanted to ask, a couple years ago there had been a study about farming and fracking and sort of dairy farmers going out of business. I'm curious if there's been any other studies, whether it's PASDA or other places that looked at farms, organic farms, and how it's affecting that we can use as resources. So that's a question for Deirdre, and then I'll have you think on that, and then I want to ask you, Mike, the decentralization. You know, this idea also. I was hearing about the wind cylindrical wind turbines, which are decentralized, and I wondered if you could speak to that a little bit. Also, if you could speak to what states are doing to kind of persecute landowners who are doing that. Like, we have solar panels on our house. It's a twin home. And we did get them from Canada, which, you know, because we could have gotten them. They were a little bit more expensive, but I'm sure there was still the issue with extraction and things, but I think they were getting a decent wage, if it's Canada at least. But I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit about that decentralization and how, I believe, like in the state of Pennsylvania, they're trying to penalize people who have decentralization, because I produce about 5 times the energy that we use in our house. So then that goes off into the grid, and whoever wants to pull it off uses it, and then I'll get a credit for it. But I understand there might be fees and things, so if you could speak to that a little bit, that'd be great.
Yeah, there was a study done last year, and you've probably seen it, Faith, but other people should hear about it too. There was a study done on a sustainable farm in New Jersey that has a gas pipeline through it to try to figure out what the crop loss was because of the gas pipeline, and the section of field that the pipeline went through had each year showed 30% fewer yields than the rest of the field, including what grew there before the pipeline came in. So that's because the topsoil is disturbed, and the pipeline produces a lot of heat, so it changes the dynamics of your soil and the kind of crops that can grow there, and it does leak. And I don't know, I mean, I'm sure there's other studies out there. I don't know of them. I just kind of called around to like certified organic companies and said, if a pipeline went through a certified organic farm, would it keep certification, and asked that way. But I'm sure there's a lot of studies out there. I'm just not sure. But there are a lot of there's a lot of human interest stories about farmers losing business. I think a few years ago, Wegmans said that they wouldn't buy meat from farms that had frack wells on them. I feel like that I heard about that like 5 years ago. So it's mostly just following the news stories. But if anybody else has any studies they know of, I'd be glad to hear them.
Let me. Is this a direct follow-up, or should I finish her question first?
Yeah, you've heard of it, right? Clean and green. You sign up, this farmer
Yeah.
gets money or something, and you can't have cows there or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah, there's clean and green, and it's a way to say that your property is, you're not polluting it, and a pipeline or a gas well does impact it, but in different ways, and you have to, it depends on your extension office, is my understanding, but yeah, there's definitely risks to lose different kinds of land certification and tax deductions.
Okay, so to answer Faith's question, first, as far as the agriculture, I'll speak to that first. I saw a study by Rodale that was put out last year that was really powerful, talking about how regenerative organic agriculture, if used worldwide, could actually suck up more CO2 through farming than is emitted by the energy industry globally each year. And of course, we don't want to stop the emissions of the energy industry on top of that so we can reverse global warming. But the fact that agriculture is the largest cause of global warming with animal agriculture, as the Cowspiracy documentary recently showed, about 51% of global warming emissions are from animal agriculture. The fact that we can turn that around if we changed our agriculture and pasture lands to regenerative organic farming and actually reverse global warming is just powerful and amazing. So if you go on our website, energyjustice.net/climate, under our climate page, there's an article critiquing carbon taxes at the top, and I have links to the Rodale study and the Cowspiracy stuff in that article. Now, you asked about the smaller turbines, the wind turbines. I know that they exist. I've heard about them for years, but I don't know that they're commercialized yet. They're probably starting to be, and I haven't really kept up with it, but I know it's a thing, and they're a thing called vertical axis turbines, and so you can do them in urban areas, and it makes a lot more sense than like messing up our mountain ridge lines by doing the industrial scale wind. So I think that's really promising. And then the last thing you asked was, on net metering. So in one of the climate justice networks that I'm in, working with folks across the country, we've recently put together a toolkit on net metering. Net metering basically is the idea that if you make more energy on your home with solar than you actually use, then you can sell that extra back to the grid and get paid fairly for it. And if you don't have net metering in your state, the electrons will still flow back onto the grid, assuming you're connected to the grid, but you won't get paid for it, or at least you won't get paid fairly for it. And based on the stuff that I showed in that article, where all these utility type people and energy industry people know that their days are numbered, like pretty damn soon, they realize that the game is totally changing on them. They're freaking out. And their freak out, the Koch brothers are a big part of the freak out, but right now, if you look in Arizona and a bunch of other states, you see they're actually trying to preserve their utility model by going after net metering and just trying to dismantle net metering laws. So they prevent people from going off the grid, or at least being more independent by having solar on their roofs. And they're actually using racial division tactics in doing this. And the NAACP is part of this network that I'm working with, where they are trying to push back on the fact that industry is pushing the Congressional Black Caucus to get them to oppose net metering as if it's bad for black folks because it's bad for poor people because solar is just for wealthy white people. Like, that's how they're framing it. And the NAACP is really pushing back and saying, no, this is something we need in our communities, and trying to put the other story out there. So it's definitely it's a big battle over whether we're going to have utilities much longer or not, and whether we're going to get to decentralize.
One of the things I've been looking at into solar in New York and in Northeast Pennsylvania is with the popularity and more companies getting into solar, you have to shop. And I think that we're going to start seeing more con artists coming in. Recently had a friend of mine tell me, it's going to cost me $20,000, and the guy said, we're the only ones in this area who do it. And it was a total lie. But that's what they want to do. The other thing that Mike was talking about net metering. A lot of the electric companies are using the fact that they say, okay, it costs 7 cents a kilowatt when we sell you your power, and when we buy it back, we're buying it back at 7 cents. And their logic is that, well, the 7 cents that we're charging you isn't just to produce the electric, it's also to maintain the infrastructure, the transformers, the cables, and all the stuff like that. So they're saying that by you selling back your power at the same price we're selling to you, you're stealing the maintenance fees of the rest of the people who are buying it, which it's total BS. So what they're doing, and I know in Colorado they were actually stopping people from getting solar power and stopping the net metering thing because they said that there was, I think there was a lawsuit about this. My thing to them is that, okay, well, if you're going to charge me for a fee to use your infrastructure, then you have to pay me for generating it. So, you know, if it's costing me $20,000 to put solar here, I just made a power plant. So pay me for giving you back the thing. And this is the argument that's going to happen now. And I think that what we're starting to see is some of the people actually downsizing. The solar companies that come and want to do installations, they want to give you solar power and say, you can, whatever you don't use, you can send it back. Well, maybe you don't need to generate as much. Maybe you don't need as big a source. This is the problem we have with our infrastructure it is now. It's designed for peak power. Like New York City, the power that goes to New York City is designed for 100 degrees in the summer with everybody putting their air conditionings on. Well, we don't need to, design it in April when you don't need air conditioning, but that's what they're generating for. And that's the problem we have. When you see these transformers that are on the poles, they're designed for transforming electric at peak times. Europe doesn't do that. In other countries, they don't do that. In the peak season, well, maybe, you have a brownout, but Americans freak out. Oh, if my air conditioning is struggling and it gets to be 78 degrees in my house, I'm uncomfortable. These are the things that we need to change our thinking about. I have a house that I designed and it's passive solar. I don't have air conditioning. I live in the woods. It faces south. I have a whole house fan, runs on electric. In the mornings, I can open up the windows on the western side and run the house fan, and it'll suck cool air from the western side and reverse it in the east. There's probably about maybe 5 or 6 days a year where it's uncomfortable. But so what? I don't have to spend the money on an air conditioner. And maybe in those evenings, I have a fan or something like that. That's not, maybe not the most, but it's still a lot better. So we have to change our thinking about what is comfort, what is not, and we're doing it. A lot of people, when I was a kid, you kept your house at 74 degrees. That was room temperature, 74 degrees. I don't know anybody here who keeps their house in the winter at 74 degrees. Personally, I keep mine at 60, but that's me. I'm just hot-blooded. So we've slowly started to realize that we don't need to do it. And the reason was because it costs more. So these are the things that, besides changing, how we do things in our buying our power and generating our power, we have to understand, okay, in the wintertime, you put an extra sweater on. In the summertime, you open a window.
I also think that the people who, in this country at least, who are usually not on these panels or doing the workshops or teaching people how to do these things are often people who are invisibilized for various reasons and know how to survive because they've been facing problems their entire lives, be it poverty or they're not white. And so they've had to work harder to get where they are and maybe know how to grow their own food, harvest their own meat, make their house cool without electricity, etc. And so those, like, it's not just like we need to switch to a different energy source. It's like we need to stop holding people down and actually taking like how to live how to live in a way that makes sense much more seriously. Listening to people who know how to do it already. I don't know. You know, I could sit here and talk about this all I want, but do I really know how to like build a house that keeps me cool in the summer? I have no idea. Do I know how to field dress a deer to feed myself meat all winter? No, I could hunt it, but I have no idea how to do that. There's other people in this room who know that. So it's that kind of thing too. It's just an entire shift in how we think about things, if you ask me.
It's a really good point too, because it's also about keeping it local and working with people that you know in your community. You had mentioned about compost, and in Delaware County, like we have Compost Chris, and he keeps it small. He tests his compost, and it's kind of like just like my vegetables. I know where my vegetables come from. I know where the farm is. I know what practices they use. Same with my compost, you know, it's like small operations. So, and again, that's really good for the local economy. I think Ben was talking earlier about exchanges, and someone might be able to speak about this more because I'm not part of it, but in the sense of bartering things, you know. If you're a carpenter, spend 5 hours doing carpentry, I can come and test your water or something. We can barter and do an exchange. So I think more and more of those things are cropping up too, and keeping it local is going to be good for everybody involved.
If you look up time banks, there's like a way you can set this up in your area, but I mean, it's really easy to just like informally like barter, like do exactly as you described, but check out time banks. There's instructions on how to set them up. It's setting up currency of you offering your time and skills and experiences and being able to receive that as well in various ways that you may need.
Which is also like, I want to bring back to the point of like time banking. The people I've seen talk about it are in really privileged positions where they've relied on money all this time, and now they're like, I don't want to use my money because it's funding dirty things. But people do time banking all the time. It's just called sharing and doing things for each other. And I think it's really awesome that people are going to start time banking because it's what people have traditionally done. And so that's the point that this panel keeps reminding me of. We put ourselves in this position by taking things too far and getting too caught up. And there's really simple ways to do this, you know?
All right, well, let's give a round of applause up now. So I'll give you a little story about John Hanger. So John Hanger, Mike has a lot of stories, backstory even on him. Comes from a group called Penn Future, which is kind of an arch nemesis of Energy Justice Network. They're based in Pittsburgh. Not arch, we maybe agree on a few things. Public lands shouldn't be drilled, you know, but like they've supported some really toxic industries in the state. But John Hanger helped start Penn Future. He was like one of their founders.
Heinz and Pew started it and they hired him.
Yeah, Heinz Foundation and Pew Research started this project to get you know, moderately green concepts going in Pennsylvania, lobby and do policy. He comes from the Public Utilities Commission, which if a pipeline doesn't cross a state border in Pennsylvania, it's regulated by the Public Utilities Commission, and they grant eminent domain to seize people's properties all the time for these pipelines, right? So that's where he comes from as a regulator. He starts Penn Future. He becomes the Department of Environmental Protection secretary under Ed Rendell. Prior to him, he came in the middle of Rendell's first term. There was this woman named Katie McGinty, who's now the chief of staff of Tom Wolf's administration, right? She was the DEP secretary who permitted all the wells in Dimmock, right? So she ran for governor, and if you were at the media training, we slammed her a lot in press releases and things. John Hanger comes in, Dimmock's water goes bad, right? Just like in sequence, right? So it's on John Hanger's desk, and he's got to decide what to do. He comes up to Dimmock, and he says, I will win justice in the church. What is the Baptist? The Baptist church right off of Carter Road. He comes up and says, I will win justice for you. With this video of him giving this stump speech like he's running. We did end up running for office. And this video is supposed to be his hero speech. As DEP secretary, he'll get justice for them. So immediately there were determination letters done by the DEP, which we have copies of, that say the water in Dimmick was contaminated by gas drilling. It was determined by the state's environmental authority. And Governor Corbett and Rendell said, oh, there's never been a single instance, even though their administration found them. So there's water determination letters in Dimmick, well casing failures being cited all the time across the industry. And John Hanger decides that there's going to be it's part of the consent order with Cabot, that they cannot drill any new permits within 9 miles around Carter Road, right? 9 miles? Right. So Cabot throws a fit, and they start this group called Dimmick Proud, because they're afraid that, they're going to have to get, kicked out of the county. They really only drill 90-something% of their wells are in Susquehanna County, and they're narrowing down all other segments of their company just to drill in Susquehanna County. And so they start Dimmick Proud, and they start slamming and counter-protesting outside the driveways of these residents when they bring tours. And this guy, Tom Shepstone, who's probably going to get a hold of this video and make fun of me for it, ends up with this company, Energy in Depth, that's part of the American Petroleum Institute. His only job in Northeast Pennsylvania was to make fun of these people, literally pick on them, write the nastiest things about the folks in Dimmick that were advocating for themselves, and it tore people apart, because if you got picked up by Tom Shepstone, you were drawing negative attention to the cause, and there were fights, infighting and things, and the psyop, the psychological operations that the military uses were just ravaging the community. So Dimmick Proud was a group that pro-drilling landowners in Dimmick joined, and it was started by Cabot Oil, and they paid for all the lawn signs to say the water in Dimmick is safe, there's no problems, the water pipeline is a waste of tax money and shouldn't be built, there should never be water deliveries done by the mayor of Binghamton, Matt Ryan, offered to send trucks down to deliver water instead of from Easton. They also said, these people are lying, they're greedy, they're in it for the money, that's what they're here for. And Enough Already was another website, I think, or whatever. It's an AstroTurf group, not grassroots, right? And so all this is going on. The water was, the first report of contamination was September 11th, 2008. January 1st, 2009, Norma Fiantino's water well blew up because there was methane buildup in the well. Then as we moved forward, John Hanger did that determination letter and the consent order. The Penvest is a infrastructure fund. It has a board, and it's set up by the state to invest in local water projects, road projects, bridge projects, infrastructure projects that towns can appeal for. We successfully got Penvest to vote to approve the water pipeline funding. And it was under Governor Rendell on John Hanger's way out. And John Hanger made the determination that, Dan Honorado, we call them because he's a rat if you're a union organizer, he busted a bunch of unions, was the Democrat, lost the election. Governor Corbett's out. John Hanger decided in between the election and the inauguration of Governor Corbett that he himself would unilaterally negotiate the settlement for the residents. So he found that if Cabot could provide some methane filtration and twice the assessed tax value of the properties, that would be enough to lift the consent agreement with Cabot to deliver water to these families, which they were doing up until then. This is going into 2011 when we were doing we started getting our water deliveries together, and a lot of that came together. And John Hanger went immediately to go work for an industry law firm that's a part of the Marcellus Shale Coalition, which he must have had a standing job offer to do. It was Eckert Siemens. And while he was negotiating this, to basically give Cabot the green light to stop water deliveries, he had to have had a standing job offer for the industry, and that was probably the bait, right? So then he goes off to work. Dimmick is without water. We get water truck, water relief. Mark Ruffalo's cause was able to get a lot of money into the water deliveries and awareness around Dimmick. Long story short, the water truck that has been funded through money from New York donors and things like that to keep going. Is maintained by Ray Kemble, who's a mechanic in Dimick, and we got a hydrant in Bridgewater Township outside Montrose, because Montrose Borough didn't want it because it was too controversial, so that it has to be outside this township do they have zoning in Bridgewater? I don't think they have. There's no zoning, so they could put it there, right? So now they got to drive around every week and fill up a water tank, and they're not the only family who uses it, so there's a whole schedule of maintaining this truck. And if Ray Kemble, something happens to him, it's like, what happens to the truck? So there's a lot of organization that needs to happen just to get the water and aid done to the families, on top of the litigation and the public advocacy for them. And unfortunately, while this is all going on, we found out Sierra Club was taking money from Chesapeake Energy nationally. In 2010, we found this out. And that the Northeast branch of the Sierra Club, which a lot of the members are still involved with the fight, doesn't meet anymore, the group, Northeast group. And so there wasn't a lot of environmental support besides just the heroes who came forward to knock on doors in Dimick and ask if they needed help. And New York did a lot of work, but there hasn't been an organization in Susquehanna County to really coordinate that. And so that's what I'm hopeful that we can, through all of this, develop that so that there's always a fight and an aid and advocacy piece going on in Dimick. So that's kind of like the organizing plan, but we need your help, especially on the litigation piece and sharing and social mediaing and all the things that students and young people and people who are wiser than I say, right, are not older, but wiser.
I was a member of the executive committee of the Sierra Club, a Northeastern group of the Pennsylvania chapter. And a lot of us had been aware of what was going on with the industry in the region. And we passed a resolution that called for a ban on fracking. And I'm proud to say that the Northeastern group of the Sierra Club, we came to a unanimous consensus on this. When it was presented to the Pennsylvania chapter, there was a big fight over it. And what ended up happening was that we had several planks. It was laid out. One of the members of the Sierra Club was a lawyer, and he laid it out properly with all of our positions. And the final plank was we called for a ban. Well, the chapter took that ban resolution and said, okay, well, we're going to take that word ban and make it a moratorium, and still it begrudgingly passed. It was like a 5-4, a very close decision. And there was never any press release or anything announcing that this had actually happened. So at the end, the person who was the, lobbyist who had to deal with all the people in the General Assembly in Pennsylvania came forward and said he did not like this being passed because he had to deal with these people. So as an end result, several of the people in the Northeastern group resigned immediately, and there was an oil and gas committee that met, and several other people, including Janine Pavallone, was on that committee, but they started taking grief from other people around the state, so then they resigned. So what happened is, by attrition, the Northeastern group dissolved. There were like about 4 or 5 of us left that were willing to meet, but we could not get volunteers and other people because of the practices of the Sierra Club and not really standing up for us in the Northeast. So there is no longer a Northeastern chapter of the Sierra Club or a Northeastern group. I would like to say, though, too, that we did take that resolution to the Green Party of Pennsylvania, and the Green Party of Pennsylvania unanimously supported the resolution calling for a ban, and that's still position of the Green Party of Pennsylvania. And I'm the chair of the Green Party of Pennsylvania.
And I just want to say, not to slam the Sierra Club too much, they do have a new executive director down in Harrisburg. Her name's Joanne Kilgour. She comes from the Center for Coalfield Justice. She's a very powerful woman. She's done environmental appeals, and she's really turning around the conversation in the club. And also Robert Gardner, who's the Beyond Natural Gas organizer, has assisted us on a number of things. He was going to come this weekend. He wasn't feeling well. I he's fighting some uphill battles, and so I just want to respect that. There are 2 staff people down in Harrisburg with the Sierra Club that are really knocking it down as far as changing things in the narrative, and I look forward to seeing a lot of things change.